So today, come on, there we go. Today we have a few different objectives. First, participants will understand the purpose of the APR. Second, participants will understand the applicable reporting period for this APR submission. And then the last one, participants will understand both how to complete and also how to submit the annual performance report. We have some workshop norms. Please try to remain muted until we have an open Q&A section at the end of this presentation, and then I'll just let everybody feel free to unmute, ask questions. In the meantime, we encourage you to drop your questions in the chat along the way, and we will do our best to address as many as we can in time, and then we'll circle back to them during that open Q&A section as well. We do have a revised FAQ that's available in the SCG locker, and we'll make additional revisions as needed if any new questions are surfaced during today's workshop. You already have access to all of these materials. You should have the APR FAQ, which has your Qualtrics submission link. So when it comes time for you to actually submit the APR, you can find that link in the FAQ. You also have access to a PDF version of that Qualtrics form. And then you have a fillable worksheet, which will be your best friend during this process. This workshop was from last week, so all of those materials are already accessible in your SCG locker through the TCSS webpage. Okay, so we'll quickly talk about what the APR is, and then we'll spend some time ensuring your success. So talking about who and how completes, who completes and how do you complete the APR, and then some helpful tips to consider along the way. Then I'll pull up the FAQ. We'll go through some like high level FAQs, and then if you have an outstanding question that hasn't been addressed up until that point, we'll spend the last portion of this webinar, again, just letting you come off mute or drop additional questions in the chat. That way you guys feel successful as you enter the completion part of the APR. All right, laying the foundation, what is the APR? So the U.S. Department of Education requires that each state education agency submits an annual performance report, or APR, for each year of the Stronger Connections grant cycle. Texas, as an SEA, is the one that actually submits the official APR to the U.S. Department of Education. But because there are 2 questions within that APR where we need additional information from our sub-grantees, which is all of you guys, we're asking you to submit this Qualtrics survey so that we can compile all of that information and use it to fill out the actual APR. So you should not expect anything from USDE in your inbox. This comes straight to us. We collect that information and share it back up to them. The APR focuses on how Stronger Connections grant dollars have been budgeted and how they've been spent, both across the SEA, so what is TEA doing with our state level activities money, and then what is the 89+ million dollars, where are those being budgeted and spent across our 99 sub-grantees. The very, very important thing to remember is that USDE is 1 year behind when it comes to reporting on the Stronger Connections grant. So what we submit to them later this spring is actually for July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. So when you're compiling what funds have been budgeted and spent, it is important to distinguish that it's only dollars budgeted and spent between July 1, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. I will note this grant did not even start until November 16th of 2023. USDE chooses these reporting periods, not us. So just be mindful that there's no world in which you should have any funds budgeted or spent between July 1 and November 16th. So theoretically, you could think of this reporting period as November 16th, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. Yeah, I'll wait and we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a couple of minutes. So USDE wants information regarding really just 2 things. One, they want to know the funds that were budgeted and expended on personnel this on personnel as it relates to 9 predetermined categories. And then they also want to know the number of personnel that were hired, again, as it relates to those predetermined categories. And then they also want to know funds that were budgeted and funds that were expended on services, supplies, and materials, supporting those same 9 predetermined categories. So this is when it's pretty straightforward in your APR fillable worksheet. If you have not opened that up until this point, I would definitely suggest going ahead and pausing, going to the Texas Center for Student Support's webpage, getting into that locker, and if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll have access to all of the APR tools and resources, and the APR fillable worksheet is one of them. The categories that you'll see are as follows. So they want to know funds that were budgeted and expended in terms of personnel and supplies and materials as it relates to school-based mental health providers and programs, mentoring or other relationship building activities, programs or activities that help prevent bullying and harassment, implementation of school-wide MTSS, PBIS, or other efforts to support a positive school climate, programs or activities that address community violence, after-school programs for students that support your levers of the student support framework. So after-school programs that support physical health and wellness, mental and behavioral health and well-being, student and staff safety and supportive discipline, school dropout prevention, reentry programs, and other efforts to keep students on track, professional development or professional learning for educators and school staff, again, as it aligns and relates to the purposes of Stronger Connections. And then lastly, there is an other category. So some examples that they give might be sexual abuse awareness prevention programs, anti-drug programs. I'll go ahead and plug that when you're thinking about direct costs, indirect costs, travel costs, this is a great way to utilize your other category. And that FAQ has been updated to reflect that statement. Okay, ensuring success. So the next couple of slides, we're going to look at a one-to-one of screenshots of the fillable worksheet, screenshots of what you would find on the Qualtrics survey, how they align and talk to each other. And so really what we're getting at is please, it is definitely best practice to complete the fillable worksheet prior to completing the Qualtrics survey. So on the left, you'll see a screenshot of the top of the fillable worksheet. On the right, you'll see a screenshot of the Qualtrics survey. So really in this first section, you'll just be identifying your region and district. You'll put your budget point of contact information as well. If you are the Stronger Connections grant lead and you are the one filling out this APR, that's totally fine. You're welcome to put your information as the point of contact, but just know that if we're collecting and compiling all this information at the end and we have a question as it relates to what's been entered, we're going to reach out to the point of contact that was left on this form. So if you feel like the person that's best positioned to answer those follow-up questions is your budget point of contact, that's why we've indicated that you'd most likely want to put somebody in there. Or if you're the SCG lead and you consulted your budget person and you feel pretty good about the information, you have a hands-on approach to your budget and you've been part of that process for a while, then you're more than welcome to leave your name. We just want to put that disclaimer there, that the person who's best positioned to answer follow-up questions, that's who we want identified in this form. Okay, so when you look at the APR fillable worksheet, the top row is your headings, and so you'll see that there are categories, and those are those predetermined categories that USDE has identified. The first column header is, did your LEA use Stronger Connections grant funding to hire personnel for any of these following categories? Something to be mindful of is that personnel is typically hired through 6100, but be mindful about any contracted personnel that you budgeted and expended funds out of 6200. We want to consider both. So again, any personnel, be it hiring out of 6100 or 6200 funds, would be put here. So in this first row, you would go yes, yes or no, straight down for any of the applicable categories. In the next column header. Same thing, only did your LEA use SCG funding to purchase supplies, materials, or services for any of the following categories? So in the first row, you're thinking about 6,100 and 6,200 personnel. In the second row, you're thinking about anything supply, material, or service-wise, which realistically could come from 6,200, 6,300, or 6,400 as well. And then if you had any capital outlay, that would count here as well. Again, this is yes, no. So just be thinking, okay, did we budget? Did we spend? Yes, no. And then you would enter yes, no. The second column or the fourth column over is what was budgeted between July 1, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. Again, you could ultimately think of that as November 16th. Another tidbit here is NOGAs were not awarded to many of our LEAs until the January-February timeframe. And many of our LEAs had local policy that said you could not spend funds unless a NOGA was present. So there might be a world where you're really looking at, January, February-ish to June 30th of 2024 based on your district's policies. But nonetheless, again, USDE determines these reporting periods. And then in the last column, you're looking at funding that was actually expended between July 1, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. These last two columns don't have to match. There are many instances where what we budgeted does not actually reflect what we spent. That's where Stronger Connections has presented a lot of flexibility. And we'll talk a little bit more about the nuances of that later, but just know that these last two rows or these last two columns, what you budgeted and what you spent do not have to match. I'll also say you might have zeros straight down. The 23-24 school year, not only did NOGAs come out late in January, February, but that was also a planning phase. And so there are many of our LEAs who have already communicated that what they budgeted was zero and what they spent was zero, because they reserved the majority, if not all, of their funds for the 24-25 school year when implementation started. On the right side of the screen, you'll see what it looks like on Qualtrics. So you'll see those same headings are in the question, in the A, B, and C portion of the question. So yes or no, did your LEA use SCG funding to hire personnel? Yes or no, did your LEA use SCG funding to purchase supplies, materials, or services? And C and D, what was budgeted, what was spent? You'll notice that while the APR fillable worksheet, everything is in one table. In the Qualtrics form, we go one category at a time. So question Q8A1, we are looking specifically at school-based mental health services. And so that's what you'll see here. So row 2 of the fillable worksheet, you have school-based mental health service providers. So you'll go in and say yes, no on personnel, yes, no on supplies, services, and materials. If the answer was yes on one or more of those categories, if it was yes on personnel and or yes on supplies, services, and materials, then in that third box, you'll indicate the funds that were budgeted. In the fourth box, you'll indicate the funds that were actually spent. Again, as it relates to this reporting period only. And then this is what matches up to this question 8A1. And then you'll work your way down. So Q8A2 is all about mentoring or other relationship building activities. Did your LEA hire personnel? Did your LEA purchase supplies, materials, or services as it relates to mentoring and other relationship building activities? Yes, no. If the answer was yes to either one or both, then you'll put what was budgeted, what was spent during the reporting period, and this aligns with the second question on your Qualtrics survey. Again, these two columns don't have to match. What you budgeted might be different from what you spent. They might be a zero. That's fine. Okay, one thing to point out is in your fillable worksheet, Q8, A4, and A5 are grayed out. That's because while there might be other state education agencies who allow these types of activities to be purchased with Stronger Connections grant funds, in Texas, our state-specific program guidelines do not allow purchases that relate to these two categories. Therefore, they're not applicable. And we just wanted to point that out because when you get to your Qualtrics survey, it will ask you Q8A1, 2, and 3, and then all of a sudden you'll get to a question that says Q8A6. We just wanted you to be mindful that that was a purposeful skip over for these 4 and 5 categories because they don't relate to our grant program. Okay. The second table that's in your fillable worksheet is asking information about the number of personnel that were hired. So in this blue box on the left-hand side, you'll see a list of predetermined categories. In the blue box on the right-hand side, you'll see in the Qualtrics question the same list of those predetermined categories. The red box on the left-hand side on your fillable worksheet, this is where you will indicate how many positions were hired. Oops. Using, again, 6,100 or 6,200 funds in each of the following categories, and that translates directly to the question that's asked on the actual Qualtrics form. So if you did hire credentialed school-based mental health service providers, then you would indicate how many. In this instance, we ask that you round to the nearest half FTE. And we also ask that you determine best fit. So if you hired a credentialed school-based mental health service provider who also worked as a community school coordinator providing wraparound supports, which you'll see is listed down here under Q9F. Even if it's an even split, you would not put half of that one person in Q9A and half of that one person in Q9F. Just determine the best fit of the individual. So even if you find that your person can fall into multiple categories, just choose one, and that is where you will report that individual across the rest of this grant program. Same goes for a half FTE. If I hired a counselor that comes in Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, I will put their 0.5 position in one of these boxes, the one that makes the most sense to the district. I won't put 0.25 here and 0.25 in another box. And then again, just like in that first reporting table where we're looking at budgeted and expended funds, when you get to this personnel table, Q9E is grayed out. Again, this is just something that was not applicable with Stronger Connections grant funds. So when you get to the Qualtrics question, this one in Qualtrics, I'll go back, you'll see one reporting table. So whereas with the last fillable table, we went question by question, this one is all in one spot. So when you get to this question, you'll notice it goes Q9A, B, C, D, and then it skips over E. That's not an error on our Qualtrics form. That's just because Q9E is not applicable to our grant program. Okay. So I'm going to, in just a moment, pull up the FAQ and go over some high-level FAQs. And then feel free during this time to continue to drop your questions in the chat. I'll let you know when we can come off mute and just ask them if that's, actually, this is a pretty small group. So you're more than welcome to come off mute and ask a question. I will say if you feel like you're in a really great spot, and you feel set with the materials that you've received, the FAQ that's already available, you're more than welcome to